So the college football season is complete. Mark Rogers TV with our final top 25 poll. So we're going to spit it out. Then you're going to give us your feedback on where we might have ranked somebody too high, too low, and completely missed it. So I lined up the teams. I'm not going to go through a huge breakdown of who beat who. I do have the teams that each team lost to kind of guide me through this. And we'll start at the top with number 1, Ohio State. They won the national championship. No argument there. There could be a debate for number 2 with, of course, Oregon losing the national championship game. TCU, so impressive. Just the one loss to Baylor by 3 points where they blew the late 21-point lead and finished with one loss with the impressive showing against Ole Miss 42-3. But I've got Oregon 2, TCU 3. Alabama at number 4 at 12-2. Michigan State, Florida State, there could be a debate there. Michigan State more impressive against the big teams. Florida State obviously struggled the entire season but continued to win games. Then they get blown out by Oregon at 59-20 in the semifinal game. Michigan State's only 2 losses to the 2 teams played in the national championship game. So I've got Michigan State at 5, Florida State at 6. I believe the Big Ten to be better than the ACC as well. Another argument for the Spartans. Number 7, Baylor. They lose a heartbreaker to Michigan State. They lose a 2-touchdown game to West Virginia. And of course, they won over TCU head-to-head. So Baylor at 11-2, number 7. Georgia Tech at number 8. Surprising to see the Yellow Jackets in the final top 10 after losing to the likes of North Carolina and Duke. But late in the season, of course, a strong game against Florida State. They beat Georgia. They beat Clemson, and then they knocked out one of the better teams in the SEC and really dominated that game against Mississippi State in the Orange Bowl. So I've got Georgia Tech at number 8. Okay, I've got Georgia at number 9. They lost to Georgia Tech. They finished at 10-3. Impressive in their bowl game. The losses aren't real pretty. South Carolina and Florida for the Georgia Bulldogs at number 9. It was difficult to weed through these 3 lost teams because they're all very, very close. But I like Georgia on the strength of their wins against the likes of Missouri and Clemson and Auburn, and the bowl game at number 9. We've got Clemson at number 10. They were impressive defeating Oklahoma. Their 3 losses are nothing to be ashamed about. Early in the season against Georgia, Florida State in overtime, and Georgia Tech. Then you've got UCLA finishing strong at number 11, although they did lose that game to Stanford that knocked them out of the Pac-12 championship game. They were impressive, at least for most of the game, against Kansas State. So I got UCLA at 11, Wisconsin at 12. They win the bowl game against Auburn. They get blown out by Ohio State, but the Buckeyes were the best team in the country. They've got an ugly loss against Northwestern. The LSU loss, not as impressive, but we know that that had some circumstances around it. We got Mississippi State at 13. They played nobody out of conference in the Western Division in the SEC, although extremely tough and probably still the best division in college football, not as good as we had thought. Mississippi State 13, Boise State, difficult to judge against the Power Fives. I've got them at number 14 after the impressive bowl showing against Arizona. They also lost to Air Force. They lost to Ole Miss in the season opener, but played great the rest of the season. Number 15, Mizzou, the bad loss to Indiana. They lost to Georgia and Bama, no shame in that. And Mizzou won some key games, including the Minnesota game against a top 25 team in the bowl game. I've got Arizona State at number 16. They finished 10-3. They lost to UCLA, Arizona, and Oregon State. Bad loss for the Sun Devils there. Ole Miss plummets to number 17, blown out by TCU, one of the best teams in the country. If not, there could be an argument, best team in the country. But again, in resounding fashion, they lose to Arkansas, LSU, and Auburn. So Ole Miss plummets to 17. I got USC at 18 at 9-4. Kansas State number 19. Arizona 20. Not very impressive in wins. Didn't play anybody out of conference. Blown out in the Pac-12 title game. Lost the Fiesta Bowl. I got Marshall at 21. Like Boise, difficult to judge, especially considering they didn't play anyone, but lost by 1 point one time against Western Kentucky in triple overtime. They looked impressive in the bowl game. They finished 13-1. I got Louisville at 22, Utah at 23 with a bad loss against Washington State. Otherwise, the Utes played an extremely difficult schedule and went 9-4. Auburn, the only 5-loss team on the top 25. The Wisconsin game was an overtime game where they missed a kick. The Texas A&M loss, not as bad as it appeared at the time with the Aggies winning down the stretch. The other losses, nothing to be ashamed about. Missouri, Georgia, and Bama. Of course, Auburn did defeat Kansas State out of the SEC. I got Nebraska at number 25 at 9-4. Don't understand the AP poll throwing in some other teams like Memphis at 25. Consider other 5-loss teams in the mix, possibly Stanford. You've got Minnesota, Notre Dame, LSU, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Again, not a ton of analysis here because I'm going to open it up for discussion. That's the final top 25 as I see it. Would love to hear from you now on Mark Rogers TV.